really don't want to go
No,
there.
no, no.
But over the last, I got very excited about this fact of biological immortality in the 90s.
Sure.
And I will just say, so your listeners, I should say, understand this clearly. The first data establishing the existence of biological immortality did not come from my lab. They came from the labs of Jim Kurtzinger and Jim Carey. And when those data were first published in 1992, people from my lab and my other colleagues here at the University of California, we went, in print, questioning the validity of that discovery. And our colleagues, particularly Jim Kurtzinger, very successfully did a series of experiments that defeated all of our concerns, defeated all of our objections. So by the mid-90s, I had to accept something that at first I wasn't willing to accept, which is the prevalence of biological immortality as a natural thing that happens later in life. And once I'd accepted it, of course, I then had to figure out why it happens. As an evolutionary biologist, we're very interested in why questions.
Yep.
And we have since spent about 15 years addressing the why question. We feel we've solved it. The solution to this one is like really complicated mathematics, but we're very happy with it. We're very happy with the solution to the problem, and we tested our solution to the problem the same way we tested the basic evolutionary theory of aging, by doing experimental evolution work and by showing that we could use our theory to predict how you could change the age in which you would make the transition from aging to immortality. And we then did experiments that showed, yes, those predictions are correct. We have been able in fruit flies to change the age at which they make the transition from aging to immortality.
Okay. And that brings up a question. A listener brought up a question here about wild Drosophilas, and that I'm unsure if you're aware of this or if this is a known thing. He is saying that wild Drosophilas can live much longer in the wild depending on light, that this is a known way to extend the life of Drosophilas, and he's wondering if the fruit flies in your experiments are just simply activating the known long life mode that wild Drosophilas have already, and then perhaps you're seeing that instead of an evolved, do you understand what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and in fact, your questioner is raising an important point. Are there environmental things that will change fruit fly lifespan? Absolutely.
Okay.
And light is one of them. Nutrition is also very important, and it turns out that you can change both the genetics and the environment to produce increases and decreases in lifespan. But it's simply not the case that we've only changed environmental factors or changed one particular signal system in the fruit fly body, because we know that we've changed many genes.
Many genes.
There are many genes that are involved. And we've done all kinds of genetic experiments that show that this is a solidly evolutionary genetic transition. And we just published a paper this month in Nature Genetics.
Okay.
Myself and some colleagues. The lead author is called Teotonio.
Mm-hmm.
Portuguese. He got his PhD in my lab. And there we show very explicitly how changing the lifespan moves the gene frequencies around. You can literally look at pictures that show how the gene frequencies change in that paper published this month. Nature Genetics.
Thanks for that reference. Another question here from a listener. I think this gets back to the back and forth that you had with Aubrey, and perhaps we can't get into all the deep technical details, but I hope you can kind of at least scratch the surface of it. He's asking, couldn't you also argue that life extension achieved by genetic interventions is not due to stopping an evolved program for aging, but that's due to natural selection or an evolved, but instead by increasing your defense against stochastic damage? So
Yes,
genetic
I
changes.
understand.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
you understand the question here, right? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's interesting, when I first got involved in the aging field in the 1970s, there were a lot of people who argued about program theories versus stochastic theories.
Sure.
And stochastic theories were variations on damage ideas. One of the interesting things about that era is probably both sides were wrong. Because at that time, people who believed in program theories of aging believed that there was a death clock, for example, and that somewhere in your brain,
Yep.
your
Pituitary gland, perhaps. Yep.
pituitary gland model, cell divisions were taking place and events were taking place in your brain, and then your brain would say, okay, it's time to die and kill you.
Yep.
It's pretty clear that kind of program theory is wrong for most animals. It may be true for some types of cells. It may be true for like worker honeybees, but it's definitely not true for organisms like us and fruit flies. We don't age because of the death clock program. On the other hand, it is also not true that there's just this general purpose damage process and all you're looking at is the tuning of damage. And the evidence against that is vast. In particular, if you manipulate reproductive patterns, you can pretty easily manipulate overall aging patterns in ways that fit very well with evolutionary theory, but don't fit with a simple-minded damage theory. Now, having said all that stuff, all I'm really saying there is, if you're thinking that evolution equals program, non-evolutionary equals damage, you're not thinking clearly.
Okay.
Okay? Yes, damage occurs.
It does.
Evolutionary biologists, yes, damage occurs. Evolutionary biologists are not saying damage doesn't occur. I also don't think that Aubrey de Grey is a creationist. So he has to accept the theory of evolution by natural selection.
Yes.
I think. I've never heard Aubrey utter a fundamentalist sentence.
No, I haven't either.
Now, if you are a fundamentalist, you can say, well, God created these different species in their own different ways, and they will, of course, accidentally accumulate damage and inevitably die for that reason. If you're a creationist, you have no problem. But if you accept evolution by natural selection, you actually have to accept Hamilton's theory because it's just derived from evolutionary first principles.
Yes.
There's no special add-ons to get to Hamilton's theory, which is, I'm sorry about introducing a name, but Hamilton was the guy who really made the concept of the force of natural selection.
Right. Some of our listeners are familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. William Hamilton is one of the most famous evolutionary biologists of the 20th century. He's responsible for ideas like kin selection, sex ratio evolution. He's, a god to evolutionary biologists, and some of the rest of you will have heard of him as well. And he's the person who really did the most to establish the theoretical framework for the evolutionary theory of aging. And of course, was a huge influence on me. So, Aubrey has a problem. His problem is if he's not going to be a creationist, he has to come up with arguments against Hamilton's theory.
He does.
I've never seen him come up with a good one. And his additional problem is there are all of these experiments done not just by me, but by many other scientists that support Hamilton's basic theory. So Aubrey has a problem. It's sort of like somebody who wants to say, I don't believe in the theories of relativity. And, if you don't believe in the theories of relativity, you're sort of stuck with explaining, well, how can they make atomic bombs work? If Aubrey isn't going to accept the evolutionary analysis of aging and evolutionary analysis of immortality for that matter, he's sort of stuck with a problem with explaining why all of our mathematics works and all of our experiments work.
Right.
Now, Aubrey is one of the most articulate human beings I've ever met, but just being articulate is not enough to stop decades of very well-respected mathematical and experimental work by many scientists.
Right. We had a guest a couple weeks ago as well, that evolutionary biologist that basically kind of said the same thing that you said, that there is plenty of evidence out there for an evolved evolutionary theory of aging. And the one thing you did say that damage is, it occurs, and I would say,
yes.
that